Hi everyone, welcome to this Outside In British Art Network Research Group closing event. Thanks for joining us. I'm just going to give it a few moments for everybody to kind of come into the room and settle and get comfy, and then we can kind of get started. In the meantime, I'm just going to run over a few housekeeping bits so that everyone's aware of. Today's event is being recorded. You should have got a notification when you joined the meeting. This is just to capture the speakers' presentations and the discussion section, but if anyone particularly doesn't want to be recorded, then please do feel free to turn your camera off at any point using the button in the bottom left. We have two BSL interpreters today. That's Ali and Michelle. So if you need those, you can pin them to your screen as well. We also have closed captioning available, and we'll be aiming to do visual interpretations of the people running the event today. If I can ask everyone to please keep yourselves on mute just while the people are speaking presentations, just to reduce background noise, that would be greatly appreciated. So today's subject is art created historically in mental health settings. As you can imagine, this fund raises sensitive and potentially challenging content around mental health. And today it includes explicit imagery of male anatomy and inferred harm. And we really encourage everyone to kind of check in with themselves, to pause as needed. There will be content markers throughout today's session so that you can do what kind of feels right to you. If you do need to drop out at any point and rejoin again later, then please feel free. There is extra signposting for resources to support you available in the chat function. But you can also reach out to any of the Outside In staff. So that's myself, Dol, Ben and Beth Hopkins as well. We really want to kind of create as much as possible sort of safe environment for everybody to share, but also a respectful and authentic dialogue so that everyone's viewpoints are heard. And we'll be encouraging that during the chat section later on. If, as I've already kind of mentioned, there is like the chat function available in the Zoom room. So if everyone wants to introduce themselves, which organisation they're from, or a bit about their research interests, then please do feel free. You can also comment on things that kind of inspired you or moved you during the presentations, and we'll be discussing them later in the discussion section. So I think most people have kind of joined. I'm going to just quickly introduce myself. So I'm Charlotte. I'm the training program manager at Outside In, and I'm also one of the co-leads for the research group project. I'm a 31-year-old white woman with sort of dark hair tied back and dark glasses, and I'm wearing kind of a white and orange shirt and a blue cardi over the top. So I'll hand over to Dol to introduce themselves as well.
Hi everyone, so it's Jo Dol. So some of you know me, some of you don't, so I'll give you a quick visual description. I am the co-lead on the British Art Network. I'm also an Outside In artist, ambassador and campaign coordinator. I am a 40-something-year-old person with pale skin, glasses and dyed kind of reddish purple hair that's quite close cropped, sat against a blurred background with a black crew neck on and a visible tattoo. And yeah, we'll guide you through, and as Charlie said, there'll be lots of opportunities for pausing and reflecting and creating, but we just ask that everyone just takes the time to do what feels right for them. But the conversations that we're having, we feel are valid and important, so stick with us if you can. Charlie.
I'm just going to give like a bit of an overview of what we'll be talking about today. So we've run through a bit of the housekeeping, but we're going to give a short sort of summary of the research group project that we've been working on for the past 2 years. And we're really excited to unveil our final artwork as well to you. We'll have 3 creative researcher showcases where they'll be talking about their research throughout the past few months. This will be followed by a kind of short comfort break. And when we rejoin, we'll be having a creative activity where we encourage everyone to relax, make, play, and join in a wider discussion as well. So a bit of a summary of the research group project. Outside In has been running this project for 2 years now. We're really excited to have received funding from British Art Network to run this and to research art created historically in mental health settings. This is kind of built on patient artwork project, which has been run by Outside In over a number of years with organisations across the country, including the Audrey Archive, the Glenside Hospital Museum, the Mental Health Museum in Wakefield, and the Art Extraordinary in Glasgow. The research group aimed to explore this area of art history, art created historically in mental health settings, that is often hidden away, is often buried within wider archives, and it's often not publicly available because of concern around the lack of consent the artist originally gave to share this work. We aimed to reduce stigma around mental health and challenge medicalised or diagnostic interpretations or displays of art. So unfortunately, this is still something that's quite common, and we wanted to put the artists in a wider context of their sort of complex and rich lives rather than just focusing on them as products of health diagnoses. We wanted to consider how we could sensitively curate exhibitions of this kind of art without normalising or silencing personal narratives. So there's often the assumption that nobody was able to give consent for this kind of artwork to be public, but actually a lot of people were really keen to share their artwork and were artists beforehand as well. And we didn't want to take a blanket approach and silence really interesting stories that could come out of this research. We aim to engage wider audiences with the art, but also artists who are working and still creating and making now, who might have lived personal experience of mental health settings. And we wanted to kind of centre those in the research. We wanted to ensure that the research is grounded in creativity. So in each session, we had creative activity that we really encourage everyone to get involved with. And these are now shared on our website. So we really encourage everyone to continue creating as they research this area. And lastly, we wanted to stimulate conversations, awareness, and new insights into this intersection between mental health and creativity. We took quite a broad approach to finding out the different research outcomes. So we've got quite a few different ways of showing this. We have recordings for all our events and the discussions. We have artwork from the research group artists in response to each creative activity. We have written reflections on each event by Dole. We've created 3 creative research opportunities for artists in the research group to explore their chosen areas in more depth, and we'll be hearing from them later on today. We've collaborated with museums across the country to compassionately consider how they can curate exhibitions sensitively moving forwards. We are creating a final summary of the research, exploring the language that's used to talk about this kind of artwork, the ethics around sharing artwork, whether and how we might do that, and how we can move forwards with this really interesting area. We're creating a compassion for organisations to sign up to show their commitment to working in this area. We're redesigning our website to showcase all of our research. And finally, we're really excited to share a final kind of collaborative artwork that has been created with the group research members as a whole. So I'm going to hand over to Dol to share a little bit more about that work.
Hiya, yep. So what you can see on the screen is the presentation of the final artwork. as Charlie's outlined, the group is embedded in creativity and art as a medium to facilitate conversation, growing, and learning. And so it felt right that the group had a legacy piece to contribute their own artwork to the timeline of mental health heritage. So the piece you can see here, that's now entered into the archive catalogue for the Mental Health Museum Wakefield. So it is part of a mental health heritage archival collection, which I'm incredibly proud of for everyone in the group, and I think you should all be incredibly proud of contributing over the last 2 years. The piece itself is inspired by New Dialogues, which has been our title, our working title throughout. It's something that Outside In have also been very proud to bring to the fore before this research group, and will continue afterwards with exploring collections courses and the like. So the piece is created from individual artists expressing themselves in audio form to the prompt, what does compassionate curation mean to me? They're anonymised because we believe that the art is the thing that should be the focus, not the identity or labelling or pathologizing of artists. And so they're layered over a close-up of part of the fabric of one of the pieces at the museum, which is actually a padded cell from the asylum itself that used to be sited there. So this is a close-up, and we do have little postcard versions available, and we can send them out digitally, or if anybody wants to request a physical copy, then we can organise that as well. But yeah, this is New Dialogues, and it now exists as a piece of mental health heritage in its own right.
So now we're going to hear from 3 of our creative researchers. So just to introduce what the Creative Research Project was, over the past few months, Rebecca Buckley, Zach Mennel, and Dee Lifter have been gaining first-hand experience researching and developing artwork in response to the research group materials and associated collections. By showcasing the expert by experience voice, we hope to highlight new perspectives on these collections and centre artists with lived experience in research, and in turn create a safe space for conversation and curation focused on compassion. So that really ties in with some of our aims that we talked about earlier in the session. So Dol, do you want to introduce our first creative researcher?
Absolutely. So this is going to be the first of 3 presentations by the bursary recipients, as mentioned. And again, I'm just going to put a brief marker in here that these are themes of personal responses to archival collections and may contain difficult themes. Please do look after yourselves. If you need to turn your camera off or take a pause, we encourage you to do so. But without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first artist, and they are Rebecca Buckley. Rebecca is a researcher, writer, visual artist, and creative facilitator. Inspired by Carol Morley's film Typist, Artist, Pirate King, and about the life of Audrey Amos, Rebecca is continuing research into the Audrey Amos archive at the Wellcome Collection, creating visual, textual, and audio art in response to Audrey's work. Rebecca facilitates creative workshops, supporting often vulnerable people with creative health to express themselves through art and poetry. Rebecca also responds to poetry commissions for theatre and magazines. So we are going to invite everybody that is speaking to give a visual description if they wish, but there is absolutely no obligation to do so. And I'm now going to hand over to Rebecca for their presentation.
Hello, everybody. Hi, I'm Rebecca. I'm not very good at doing these visual descriptions. I guess I would say I am a middle-aged, mixed race woman with quite short hair. I'm wearing a colourful silk blouse with reds and yellows. And is that good enough, Joe, do you think? Hopefully. So I just wanted to start with one of Audrey Amos's artworks, just to give you a little bit of a flavour of the artwork that I've been really, really glad to have spent quite a lot of time over the last few months, basically investigating, delving into. This piece, it's called Billiards, and I believe it's watercolor. When you look at the references on the Wellcome collection, it doesn't always say what the materials were, because, to be honest, they probably don't know unless Audrey has let them know by putting it on the artwork itself. So this just gives you a little bit of an understanding of, given that Audrey was born in 1933 and this was created in 1947, so this is really, really early on in Audrey's artistic journey, and it already shows, to be honest, what a spectacular artist she really was. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of a flavour, also of some of the humour within her artwork that I've found. So if you could go on to the next slide, please, Charlotte. And the next one. Thank you. And then the next one, please. So I'm going to just give you, sorry, could you go back to the previous slide? Thanks. I'm going to give you just a bit of a flavour of how I came to this research. So I came to Audrey through Carol Morley's film Typist, Artist, Pirate King. I follow Carol on social media and I'm a huge fan of her work, and I was really intrigued by her subject matter. So I saw the film at BFI South Bank before I really knew anything about Audrey, and before the opportunity for the Creative Research Bursary came up through Outside In and the British Art Network. So when that did, it just seemed like basically a gift horse, really, because I'd already joined Wellcome. I was already really excited to see Audrey's artwork. I'd already seen a couple of pieces, and I was really just absolutely over the moon that I was lucky enough to secure one of the bursaries. My original proposal, it included sort of the main aim, which was to look at the othering of artists with mental health difficulties. What I mean by that is where artists who experience mental health difficulties, where their art is both presented and viewed through the lens of mental health, and what impact that has on how we view their art and their reputation in the art world. So that was where I was starting from. But what I wasn't prepared for was my emotional response to Audrey's work and to her story. I knew that I felt an immediate connection to Audrey, and I literally felt that, emotionally as I was watching Carol's film. And I think one of the reasons I felt connected is because there are parts of Audrey's life that are very, very close to my own. So there is a resonance regarding my own lived experience with mental health difficulties. And hence there were synergies between Audrey's story and my own. But what I like to go on to talk about is, and show you here through my art, is how I felt going through this process. Because I was finding that there were tensions between my original proposal and really how I could actually undertake the research. And one of the huge difficulties I found was separating Audrey's art and her life and story, which is kind of impossible. So my original premise, I think, I wouldn't say, I would say possibly it was there was a naivety to it, in that it's very difficult to separate the life of an artist from their work. But what I found myself thinking more and more about was, well, how do I celebrate Audrey's artwork when I felt, other people might think differently, that Audrey's artwork or Audrey's art was not fully recognised during her own lifetime. She was a spectacular artist. And actually, I felt, in some respects, sometimes a little bit intimidated by the fact that she was so good. But one of the things that came up in the process really was I was finding that I was becoming by Audrey's work. That even though, if you look at this first image, this is called Hiding. So this is sort of I'm proffering this as my sort of first response to Audrey's artwork, because I did feel quite alien within a place like Wellcome. I don't know how many of you have actually been in the Wellcome collection centre. Maybe you've been to see an exhibition there, but if you go into the library, it is fantastic, but it's pretty huge. It's quite difficult to kind of come to grips with it. And where I was doing the research in the rare materials room, it's very kind of rarefied. And by that, I mean, you can't get in without sort of, using your card to sort of click in. Once you are in there, you need to be let out. So you're kind of, not deliberately, but you're kind of locked in. So this piece, which I do a lot of work not using brushes, so I've used a background to this. It's done using a palette knife. And then I have used a very small brush, but this is a figure which is really kind of about me feeling, oh God, I'm actually feeling a bit alienated. And I'm kind of wanting to hide, because am I really a researcher? Even though I have done a fair amount of research, through my life, I'm not an academic researcher. I don't have a PhD. Am I good enough to do this? Because I don't have those letters after my name. I mean, these are all things that have come up for me throughout this research. So this piece kind of like really represents kind of how I was feeling at the beginning, when I was having to go through all those processes and wear gloves to view various to view certain paintings that were fragile, of paintings of Audrey's. So this is really, these visual parts of my presentation are really about the feelings that Audrey evoked. And my art is here is a direct sort of emotional response to Audrey, especially as I'm a survivor with lived experience of mental health. So if you go on to the next slide, please, Charlotte. So one of the things I find really brilliant about Audrey's artwork is the breadth of her practice and the immense skill that she showed from an early age and throughout her lifetime. And I was really inspired, because there is this thing when you're an artist, people usually, quite often people will say to you, well, what kind of artist are you? And I think if they had asked Audrey that question, she wouldn't have just come back to them and said, I'm a painter, because she did print, she did painting, she worked in charcoal, she worked in almost every medium, apart from, and I could be completely wrong about this, I haven't seen any collage. Doesn't mean that the collage from an artwork point of view doesn't exist, but there are other items within the Wellcome archive, her scrapbooks, which you could call them artworks in themselves, which are like a form of collage using a lot of everyday objects. So you could say that actually she did use collage as well. But this piece, which I'm calling No Face, it has lots of different titles. So this is where I've responded to Audrey, again, kind of, feeling quite emotional when I'm viewing her work. And I'm using a technique with what would be the face of something called erasure. Where you spread paint across, you let it dry slightly, and then you effectively take bits off. And the point of this piece really is about, well, who am I? Because I'm looking at Audrey's artwork, I'm reading about her story, and it's kind of stirring up quite a lot of emotions for me, things that I kept hidden about my own mental health throughout my life, probably until about sort of 2 or 3 years ago. So the other thing is that because Audrey used so many different materials, and I hadn't really made any artwork for about a year, what I managed to do, or what Audrey inspired me to do, was, well, let's just play. Because when you look at her output, which is just amazing. I mean, I've just been reading through some articles recently, and my understanding is that there were 80 boxes in the archive, something like 5,000 sketches, I believe, and then her artworks on top of that, and all covering lots of different mediums and materials. And so this artwork is really sort of about, okay, so I've been hiding, so that's why you don't actually see my face, but you see kind of a representation of my face. Next slide, please, Charlotte. So with this piece, I do a lot of recycling. I've got quite a lot of artwork kind of stored up. I think I'm very much like Audrey. I don't throw many things away, so I've got a lot of stuff in my flat, including sort of most of the artworks that I've ever made. So this piece originally was just a line drawing in charcoal. And I'd seen some of the abstract work that Audrey had created using some pastels. And I love her use of color, the fact that she uses really bright colors, often contrasts. So the contrast for me of the black and the orange. So I went over and I don't know whether the word is transformed, but I think transformed what was a simple line drawing into something else. Which I guess also tries to kind of evoke that sort of sense of, actually, I'm feeling a bit alienated. I'm feeling a bit kind of slightly lost and not quite sure of myself in this situation. As I've sort of talked about, being in a quite an amazing archive, and sometimes feeling a bit of a fraud. But what I would say is that Welcome have been amazing. From a helpful point of view, how warm and welcoming they were, how excited they were that I was doing this research, genuinely, humanly excited, in a lovely, welcoming kind of way. So next slide, please, Charlotte. So this, again, I had done quite a few years ago, I'd done just a line drawing as part of my university course at the time. And again, this is about colour and about playing, inspired by Audrey's use of colour. And if you get the opportunity to look into archive, you'll find, especially, I believe, during her school years, before she went to the Royal Academy School, she played around and did a lot of prints, which used a huge amount of contrast of color. And I just thought, actually, I could make something. When I saw her still life drawings, I was kind of, okay, so still lifes don't have to be boring. And again, this is like a little bit of a revelation to me, and an inspiration from Audrey. So I just played around with the colors here, and I put the drawing itself onto a black background, and had a lot of fun. And I think going through the archive, I sensed how much Audrey enjoyed making her art. There's a kind of vivaciousness, there's a vivacity about her artwork, especially when she actually does work with figures, like going back to when you saw the slide earlier, or the digitization of her artwork, the billiards one, that there's a movement and vivacity to the work where she actually, represents people, human beings doing something. So moving on to the next slide, please, Charlotte. So this one was an abstract, and I haven't found a huge amount of abstracts within Audrey's work, but I have found she is just amazing with brushstrokes, and her ability to evoke emotion through her use of brushes really inspired me. I don't tend to use brushes very much. I think I'm a bit afraid of them. Something to do with my lack of confidence as an untrained artist. I didn't go to art school. Basically, everything I've done has been through, from a training point of view, has been through evening classes or adult education. But it was an inspiration, and I kind of it was one day where I was thinking, actually, I'm going to play and I'm going to use some brushes and I'm going to see what I can create, and I'm going to see whether or not I can transpose my mood onto the paper. So this is called Maelstrom, because I was going through a little bit of a difficult period at the beginning of the year. So and this is like a reflection of that. I think also there's some sort of deep-rooted pain. I found out about halfway through this part of my project that Audrey had been in the same hospital that I had been in, Wallingham Park. So that was it was a shock. And the reason it was a shock, it was a personal shock, because I buried a lot of the stuff. I buried a lot of the emotions and the pain and the memories of that experience, which happened to me when I was a teenager, and to sort of be faced with that. So there is something of that in this as well. Next slide, please, Charlotte. So this one, again, is experimenting, inspired by Audrey's use of colour, especially watercolour, which I hadn't really used watercolour until I started delving into Audrey's archive. I think she showed me through her art what you can do, how, just how many different things you can do with watercolor, which I had always thought of as quite a boring medium, but found it not boring at all when I was looking through Audrey's art. And this is really just, it was a beautifully sunny day. I think I just walked through the park that day. And this is through Hyde Park. So, and I'd been along the Serpentine. So there's sort of representation here of water, of grass, although it's an abstract. So yeah, I was playing around and again playing with brushes. So I think I've kind of got over my fear, or my huge fear of brushes. And I think that is down to Audrey. So next slide, please, Charlotte. So this one is called Alien, and it's had a number of different titles. It's, gosh, I was playing with, I don't know what the technique is called, but if you actually lay down, different objects on the paper, and then you literally paint across them. So I don't know what it's actually called technique-wise. So for the background, I was using that, and I was using a combination of implements, some printmaking tools, etc., rather than brushes, and then picking out a figure from amongst that. again using watercolor, which I'm still sort of stunned at what you can do with it and what kind of colors you can effectively, you know, what you can evoke using the vivid colors that I wasn't expecting from watercolors. And this again is about that feeling of, okay, so I'm an artist, but I'm an artist who has a lived experience of mental health difficulties. And sometimes that does make me feel alien within what I would call the normal structured art world. You know, that thing about having that title outsider artist, which immediately puts you outside, you know, not being part of the mainstream. Yes. Next slide, please, Charlotte. So this this is I call this Goldeneye because it kind of reminds me, you know, that swirl at the beginning of the Bond movies, and that's why I call it Goldeneye, just as a joke. But again, this was a recycled piece, so I've used Indian ink. And then I've effectively, so the ink was there, and then I've gone over using acrylic paints and some pastels. And I've also, if you can see in the center of sort of the swirl, you can probably see the faint figure, which is actually me. It's a representation of me. It's really about, again, feeling slightly lost, feeling not kind of part of, as an artist, as a person, and how to come to terms with that. So it's kind of exploring that sort of sense of sadness, I guess, you know, from my own experiences, but also taking some inspiration again from Audrey's use of color, so with the yellows and the reds together. And then the sort of big contrast of that with the black. So on to the next slide. But this one, I'm calling this Blue. And again, inspired by Audrey's use of color. This is watercolor. This one is really about how I was feeling one day in the rare materials room at Wellcome. Because I was overwhelmed with sadness. And I think there is a vivacity that Carol Morley captured about Audrey. And in that film, there were some rare moments where you saw some of Audrey's own sadness. But I was feeling sad because of her immense talent, I guess, and because that talent wasn't recognised fully, I feel, within her lifetime, and I'm hoping that will change soon. So yeah, and it's called Blue. I think it's kind of quite self-explanatory why it's called Blue. So on to the next slide, please, Charlotte.
Just as we're flicking on to the next slide, I'm just going to give you a time check, and I've asked people to start to put questions and comments in the chat for when we get there. Just wanted to let you know that we are at time. So okay.
Right. Okay. So this, I believe this is the last one anyway. So this is called Fractured, and in brackets Falling. And this really is about me. It looks reminiscent of a mask, I guess, and it's come from some marks that were made by tracing over another drawing of mine. And it's really about the fact that I've worn many masks sort of throughout my life, and how Audrey has helped me take some of those masks off, which is really hugely helpful in my life. So I will end there.
Amazing, thank you. So just at this point here, I'm just going to say thank you, and I'm going to gently remind you about the link we're going to share in chat now. So Ben, if you could pop that into chat for people to access. And then I've also seen Barbara asked about where we can see more of your work and Instagram, and I wondered whether, for the sake of the recording and privacy, that if the artists wish to share their personal non-outside in links, they can private message and do that offline. If not, we can share the outside in gallery links, but we want everyone to make sure that they're safe and only engaging in a way that feels right. So Rebecca, do you want to explain the welcome link?
Yeah, I was really pleased. There's not a huge amount of Audrey's work that is digitized yet. I mean, and I completely understand that because her archive is massive. But I was really lucky to kind of like sneak in because every now and again they open up an opportunity to get some work scanned or digitized if you would like to be able to try and use it. And so I didn't realize I asked for one image to be scanned, and they scanned all of the files. So that link is actually to some newly scanned or digitizations of Audrey's artwork, so you can get an understanding of her of what she could actually produce, and what an amazing artist she is. And I would say obviously entirely up to you, because there's quite a lot about Audrey on Welcome's site, but I would say look at the artworks first before maybe looking at the films or looking at the sort of description. And the reason I say that is I'd like you to see her artwork first before that then gets linked with her mental health, which is kind of like, where I was coming from anyway, in the sort of the original main aim of my research. And I'd just like to say, we didn't show the slide, but very, very many thanks to Welcome for their support, their empathy, their warmth, whilst I've been doing the work that is part of this bursary.
Amazing. So just in the interest of time, there are some amazing comments which I think I would encourage you to take a second and reflect on, and maybe turn your camera off and take them in fully. There was a question about responses, but what I will do is I'll just hold that for a second, and just, if you let me know how you're feeling and if you can hang around till the end, and then we can have a bit more of a chat, just because I am very conscious of time and we've still got obviously 2 more presentations. How are you feeling? Do you think you might
I mean, it would be good to understand what the timing is, because I am quite tired.
Yeah.
So that was one of the reasons why I wanted to, if anyone had any questions, I wanted to kind of take them now. But
so
what you're saying.
Should we gently touch on the question, because the rest are more comments, and then we can expand on it more afterwards, maybe, as in a written afterwards. So there was a comment from, let me go back up, I think it was from Colin, about how you might respond to the collection, as in Audrey's collections of work, and the messages that you might want to purvey in doing so.
Oh, good question.
I've kind of ad-libbed that. That's what he said.
I think I have some ideas, and this is really all about funding, more ongoing funding for this research, because I certainly haven't finished. I've scratched the surface, but I'm in the process. I've been recording some sound about the process of the research itself. So I'm thinking of a soundscape that might include some words of mine about my response to Audrey's artwork. But I think the exhibition would be really about how it feels as another artist to come across this amazing archive, and what that can make what Audrey's artwork can achieve from an emotional response point of view. So I think there would be, I suspect, probably some audio-visual work, and probably to try and get some reactions from people who have actually seen the film, from people who have maybe came to the event that Welcome put on, where you could see like a small amount of Audrey's art. But I think what would be really great is if it was alongside an exhibition of Audrey's work. And I keep asking Welcome, and I understand something is in the works, but they can't really talk about it.
Oh, that sounds like a watch this space. Yeah, so we can definitely put people in contact with Rebecca privately if there's anything that might come up in terms of potential collaborations or funding, because the whole point of this group is to work together to explore the narrative beyond when the funding finishes for the British Art Network. I very much appreciate that you are probably tired and need to take a minute, so I am going to say thank you, and if you can stay, that's great. If you want to be camera off, that's also fine, but do have a read of the wonderful comments in the chat as we now say thank you to Rebecca and then move on to our next artist, and that is Dee. So Charlie, am I okay just to launch in, or are we doing another show? Yeah, cool. So I'm going to read out the introduction for Dee, and then we're going to be sharing a recorded piece and then coming back to the artists themselves afterwards. Again, if you have any questions or comments, please pop them in the chat and we can pick them up as we move through. Just be mindful that our artists do have their own experience of different conditions and life impacts, and so might need to tap out throughout. So Dee Lister is a mixed race artist, trauma survivor who works with intuitively and playfully to create diverse art currently focused on safety and their experience of abuse recovery. Dee sees creativity as an everyday need, and to this end maintains various everyday somatic art practices. In the past, Dee's completed PhD research exploring the untellable stories of cisgender women living with invisible illness. And as with all of our sharings, please be gentle to yourself and engage as you need to, but also respect that these are personal stories and responses to mental health heritage. Over to the recording.
I'm going to talk to you today about my creative research. This slide that you can see before you has got the front covers of 3 zines that I've put together. It's got lots of the research and the art and some words to contextualize in it. That'll be online as part of the New Dialogues final resource, and I'm going to do some print copies, which is exciting. Just some trigger warnings around some things I'm touching on: mental health, trauma, suffering, and I'll let you know when the last section starts, where I share some poetry art using words from the Bethlehem Asylum case records. Okay, absolutely no need to read this. It's a very busy picture in front of you, which is a mind map of when I was trying to think of how to tell a story in the zines that I decided in July to make after spending 4 months collecting material and making art of very different types, as per my usual way. I doodle a lot, and I kind of see everything that I do as a type of doodle, like poetry included. So yeah, this mind map just shows you how much there is to cover, and I just can't explain everything today, unfortunately. There just is not time. So I'll just give you a little snapshot. The corner picture is part of my process diary. I'll explain a bit more about that in a second. And it says, how do I narrow down? Do I narrow down? Which sort of summarises my feeling and something I had to check in with regularly during this research. I work in a very open-ended way with everything to do with my creative and actually my everyday life too. So to share my process and to actually just work in a way that's very process orientated and intuitive is how I've approached this creative research as well. I've included some words in this presentation which are excerpts from the zines, just to explain context. And I kept a process diary, which was in the form of a concertina sketchbook. The process diary, as the words say on the screen, is like the plot of a story. It was the narrative thread, and it prompted and stirred my creativity and offered me space to make sense of things, which is how I kind of make sense of things generally, to doodle my way through it, to take photographs, to write words, to make collages and lots of stuff. I was looking at so much material online. I'll explain a bit more about that shortly. In fact, I'll explain a bit more about that now, because the aims of this research were to creatively respond to, I'm calling it mental health art, but basically art that was created by people who experience mental health issues, past or present, or in mental health care settings. And I had a big connection with the Bethlehem Museum of the Mind art, which the New Dialogues Research Group is connected with too, as no doubt some of you know. Another aim was to work in the present in a process-orientated way, as I just touched on, and specifically to keep myself safe as a trauma survivor, as a researcher, and as a human being who has needs, which is always important. These are two pictures of entries in the process diary. The one on the left purposely shows how the concertina diary unfolds. You'll be able to see, and again, you don't need to read the content, it's just to show how busy the entries, the doodles were basically, because it was really relevant. These were from back in April, and there you can see like how much space is used across the pages. There was a lot going on then. I was just trying to settle into things, and I doodled a lot. There was a lot more during the beginnings. On the right, you can see, I haven't got time to explain it, unfortunately, but I called it the twine line, like a timeline process, inspired by an artwork by William Kurelek. And you can see some clocks, because as someone who lives with complex trauma, or CPTSD, to use the medical term, I don't really experience things in a linear way, and I didn't experience this project in a stepped linear way either. So that's just a couple of examples. To show you a couple more, there's lots of them in Zine 1, which is called Staying Open, Staying Safe. You can see on the left, I think these are, the first one is from June, the second one is from July. Again, it's that twine line that's coming through. I was really inspired by what I was looking at. Wow, interesting, I was thinking. And I wanted to stay inspired, but also I actually let go of that idea of the twine line. I'd reached a point where I was thinking, oh, what next? Because I started making the poetry art series that I will give you an example from later. On the right, the star of motivation, as I'm calling it, I went to the Bethlehem, which wasn't my plan. I was planning on only looking at mental health art online and being inspired that way to keep myself safe. I've written about that in Zine 1 and 2. Moving into the other aim of meeting my own needs. In fact, that's still very much part of the process of doing this research. And it's written about in Zine 1, particularly, though it's a kind of implicit thread throughout all of them. Boundaries. Boundaries is a really important thing in life, and boundaries is a really important thing when doing research. Anyone that's familiar with my work may recall that I actually write words like pause, and in this case I wrote boundaries in big. This was an A3 piece that I folded as well to make it 3D. These little creative breaks were my way of resting and also echoing back what I was trying to do with this sort of thing, the boundaries, the pauses. And I realised that my creative process and trauma recovery are intertwined. It's not the first time. I've known about this for years, but it was something it was brought to my attention again and again, and that's reflected in the process diary as well. Here are 3 more pictures just to show you examples of other ways in which I doodled and could share my process of doing this research and kept myself safe in the way of doing it. So the left picture shows a doodle where keeping myself steady while I was making art about difficult things. So it's like, it was meant to be like an umbrella. And on the right, you can see the pause and the breath, breathing slowly, which is always nice and always refreshing. For me, anyway. I mentioned earlier about William Kurelec's inspiring the twine line, and it was, to use the term, a thread throughout these 2 first pieces that I made during the project. Back in April, when I wasn't really sure how to approach things, apart from knowing that I was going to look at the online work, considering my access needs, I started doodling. I did these one after the other, and I carried them on by, I just had a little moment going, oh, this reminds me of Ball of String and Other Nonsense, which I really like that piece. In cherry picking the sharing of some of the art that I made during the project, there's quite a lot of it. Again, it's shared throughout all the zines. This piece was inspired by Linda Bamford's Psychedelic Woman, which throughout the research, whenever I look at it, it creates a certain feeling in me, this feeling of strength and power. This pastel is an A3 artwork that I did. Again, it was a doodle, and I really like it because it conveys how that piece makes me feel. Okay, moving on to another thread to this twine line, this explanation of this creative research. I did intend to only look at online mental health art. Initially, it was the Adamson collection that I was looking at, which you can look at for free on Art UK if you're not aware. But I navigated through a personal connection to the Bethlehem Museum of the Mind in Bromley. I'm in the northwest, but there's so much shared on the Museum of the Mind website. And thinking about my access needs as a person living with disability, as someone who, especially in April, I was in a very different place even to in May. I knew that I wanted to be able to regulate and work from home, and that was the plan. However, looking at pieces like Psychedelic Woman that I shared in the last, that I was inspired to create art about, and that is part of the Museum of the Mind's online art collection that you can see for free, I really felt very drawn to go to the museum and see it for myself and see all the artworks that were inspiring me for myself, which was a really big leap. And it took a lot of courage to make that decision. It took me about a month to make that choice. And once I did, I was like, right, I'm going to do this. I'm going to use all my resources and my resilience. I knew I could do it. I used to live in London for quite a few years during a very different time of life in my 20s, which was a while ago. So I've talked about that more, you guessed it, in the zines. I haven't got time to explain any more context now, but 4 pictures in front of you. The 2 middle ones actually aren't shared anywhere else, so I thought I'd give you a little window. The idea of a snail, I love nature, and I really value my close connection to nature. I see myself in many ways as a snail as someone that's gliding and moving through life at their own pace, and as I need to meet my own needs. And that partially involves finding quick exits. The pictures in the middle show a bus stop. I edited it to make it reflect how like fuzzy and unwell and all over the place I was. And the bottom picture is actually from one I took in the archives, which was an amazing experience, and I'd really recommend it to anyone to go to see art, to see in museum archives as an experience that's quite unforgettable. Just that second trigger warning, I'm going to go into content from the Bethlehem Museum of the Mind hospital archives and use words from a case record. First of all, though, and changing the tone a little, and noting that I'm being deliberately provocative, and I don't want you to do this deeply, just to think of it. If you want to, you don't have to. Bring to mind an experience of mental health care, a mental health care setting. Just take a few seconds to do that. And thinking about that experience, and I can think of a few myself. I mean, did you feel safe? And did you feel heard if you were talking to someone about your mental health? And as an introduction to this poetry art series that I did during the creative research, imagine now, from your experience, imagine not feeling heard. Imagine having said something and then choosing not to talk. And there's so much behind that when we choose not to talk. Does the space feel safe, even if it claims to be? Do we feel like we're being treated like a collection of symptoms, a disorder, something very dehumanized and objective and not empathetic and not emotive? And imagine being called insane, that horrible word, or at least I don't enjoy it as a word, and still hear it, which makes me feel a lot of things. So I didn't intend to respond to case records and material I found online on the Bethlehem Museum of the Mind website. You can see loads of archived material there. And I sort of stumbled across this. But when I did, words like, insane and causes of insanity and all the observations and raw, terrible ways in which these patients were seen, well, not seen actually, but written about and observed, I really felt compelled to do some poetry art or to do something creative in response to it. So I'm going to read out one example from 10 poetry art pieces I did, about 7 women, some of them have 2. I wrote about why and with context in Zine 3. So these pieces, which were about, I'll just say the first names, Francis, Benjamin, Francis, Burroughs, Hannah, Ada, Hilda, Mary and Sarah, real people who lived lives and were in these mental health settings. The notorious Bedlam of the 16th century, 16th, 17th, I think. And now, at that point in time, it was the late 18th century. The suffering is tangible in these case records. So I created poetry art collages, basically, and I juxtaposed the women's, how I imagine they could have spoken if they were using, I used the words of the alienist, but the power behind it was where the meaning lies. I'll just give you one example Mary Emily Wickham, age 29. Incessantly told, not so excited, be normal, blank. Bruised governess is unmanageable, still maniacal, does not know where she is, looks unseemly, over-singing troublesome, laughing patient, throws grotesque clothes, irrationally restrained, electricity, drugged, electricity, now quieter, little interest in anything, discharged, uncured. Thanks very much for listening. I'll leave you with a question. How far have we come since the days of the asylums?
Okay, so I'm just going to have some clean space for a second so that everyone can reflect on the question posed by the artist. Please feel free to use the chat and again engage in a way that feels right to you. We will be having a wider discussion after the creative activity later today. If you want to hold your questions, that's really up to you. So I'm now going to invite Dee to maybe start with how it feels to be at the end of one of the paths of the research.
I didn't do that bit where I show you, where I say what a visual description. Do you want me to do that as well?
That's entirely up to you. If you want to, then yeah, feel free.
I am Dee. I'm 40. How old am I? I'm 41. I'm mixed race, brown skinned, and I'm wearing a grey t-shirt with a blue, can't remember which kind of blue cardigan. What did you just say, Dole? Sorry. At the end of the process, how it feels. Is that the question?
Yeah, just like I know you use a lot of analogies like threads and paths and I guess tempos and things. So I just wondered how it felt to be at this point now and like what that means. And obviously that will give people a chance to have a think and stuff as well.
It's quite a big question, isn't it? Because it's like, how do you feel about anything that you invest so much into of yourself? And I mean, I really believed in what I was doing with those poetry art things, because what is in those records is just like, honestly, it's like, it felt like the earth just disappeared under me for a while, even though I'm very aware of what these things were like. So getting to this point feels kind of odd. It's like, oh, I'm at the end of this, because I do work in quite a structured way, in that I knew that this was the end point and this was when I was going to draw a line at this phase. So I kind of am like, this is amazing. This is amazing. This is such a great thing. But I also really know that there's more to be done. So it doesn't quite feel like an end. And being completely open with everyone on here, I'm not in a great place right this moment because I've had a bit of a day. So if you ask me tomorrow, I might give you a different answer, but I would say joyful, a bit overwhelmed by not like, what do I do now? A little bit concerned because I don't have funding. I need to try and find some funding. But also really grateful because this whole experience has just been, it's literally been life-changing. It's just so rewarding to go so deeply into such emotive art and to feel so connected to other artists who, you know, aren't doing things commercially, or they're not, like, I'm not doing this stuff to sell. I kept saying about the zines, and yeah, to be fair, I am trying to sell those, but but I don't create stuff with that in mind. So yeah, that's the best I can answer right this moment.
I think that's, as you know, very articulate and erudite. I wonder, because of you being so candid, if it might be an idea for us to pause there, and then maybe when we come back for the discussion later on, either if you are still able to join us, even if it's camera off, I could repose that last question to the group, so we can circle back to it after people have had some chance to decompress and process. How does that feel?
That'll be grand. I will be here.
Awesome. So yeah, feel free to camera off or whatever you need to do, and we will be going into a break shortly anyway. So but for now, thank you. Please have a read of the wonderful comments in the chat, and again, thank you everyone. So this next presentation is going to involve me sharing. So I'm just going to make everyone aware that the next artist again will be sharing from responses that are personal to them, instinctive to them, and we did put in, as we have with the rest of the sharing, precursor in the email that you got, but we are now going to start a slide that will cover another content warning, and an opportunity to turn your camera off or leave the session and rejoin us at a fixed point. So just bear with me whilst I bring up the relevant slide and share my screen. So sorry, this is going to be a little bit techy. Okay, can everyone see that? Just give me a thumbs up, somebody. Amazing. Okay, so I'm going to leave that on that for now. We're going to have clean space for the content marker, and then I will introduce our next artist, Zach, and then their presentation, so that we have nice defined space between each of our artists. Okay. Let me just flick over. Okay, so the next presentation contains imagery and discussion relating to sexuality, both in relation to identity and desire. Some of the reference material is considered explicit and is intended for an adult audience. So to respect the artist's voice and open, informed conversation, we will now begin a countdown timer for anyone who would like to take a brief pause at this point, and then we warmly invite everyone to come back and rejoin the group for our creative activity at 2:30. So there will be a break for everyone who is staying anyway, but we just want to reconvene and pick back up. There is no judgment, expectation. We just wanted to make sure that everybody is doing whatever they need to do to feel safe. So, and in order to respect that, I'm just going to make sure that I'm keeping an eye on who is engaged. And as an extra step, I think might be a good idea, we've had the guidelines put back into the chat for anybody that it might come up for them. We have team members if you want to private message. And so before we move on to the next part of the conversation, if people who have their cameras on, or if your camera off, just give me a thumbs up for us to continue. I think that's a good way of knowing that everybody who is here wants to be here. Amazing. Fabulous. So I'm glad Zach wants to be here. Okay, so let me just get my little description point up and then we will crack on. So, okay. So our next artist, which is, this screen's going to flick over in just 1 second and we're going to see the lovely imagery. So the next artist is Zach Mennel. They are an emerging self-taught artist that use photography, performance and writing to explore queerness and neurodiversity in relation to presence and visibility. Their experiences as someone queer, working class, neurodivergent and disabled inform their practice, and they use art to imagine different ways of inhabiting the world beyond the mode of daily survival. So, Zach, would you like to give a visual description now or at the end?
I'm happy to give one now. Hi everyone, I'm Zach. I am a 30-year-old white non-binary person with curly blonde hair. I've got light gold glasses and I'm wearing a white and light blue stripy shirt.
Fabulous. So I've hit play and this is now going to go into your presentation. So over to you.
Fab. I mean, first of all, to say thanks to Outside In, to Jodol and Charlie for the opportunity to undertake this research. It's been really incredible, and I hope I do justice to that in this. So Dole sent me a series of questions to respond to, and so that's mainly what I'm going to be talking about, whilst also doing tangents to explain the work that you're seeing online, which you're seeing on your screen, which is going to move through automatically on the video. So this is a piece using footage I've pulled from the beginning of a documentary about the artist Rolanda Polonsky, who was compelled to live at Nevern. And this is sort of from the BFI collection, which is also held in the Adamson collection, of opening and establishing shots of Nevern from outside and then inside. And that is chroma keyed or green screened with a painting that I've done based on some things that are in the archive. So while that's happening, I'm going to answer the first question, which Dole sent me, which was, when did you know that you'd found an aspect or artwork that you wanted to explore further? And for me, it was often about sticking with the difficult parts. There were many instances of noting that I've had similar experiences in psychiatry, also noting the distinct absences. When I was sectioned on a locked ward, we had no access to materials for making or creativity or sort of processing anything. The only offer that was made to me was a really sort of sad and pathetic tray of dried lavender that we could put in little bags to sniff that was intended to calm us down. And that was the activity. And the NHS has like really shifted away from any sense of this service, sort of beyond the brutal bare minimum to keep people alive is the intention broadly. And much of what I've sort of come across in the Adamson collection that was happening at Nevern is sort of seems to be post-war, pre-Thatcher implementation of arts therapy and also studying that, which is sort of from what I know from the research that's done by Rose Rowan and generously offered by David O'Flynn, who's in the chat. Adamson was invited by Cunningham Dax to come to Nevern to provide a sort of a study, an art studio for art therapy. And so we exist in what I like to call a post-Thatcher world, and we're still very much seeing the repercussions of that in our healthcare and our social fabric. And I think that sort of really interplays here. A lot of what I'm thinking about is about context and historic context, and then the reception of that, or the echoes and harmonies of that. I'm just going to go back to my notes. So this work, this collection of the Adamson collection, is also within the context of the closing of the asylums and the hospitals, the residential hospitals, and the move to care in the community, which was a Thatcher government policy and something that happened where no implementation was given for any care in the community. And we are still feeling the effect of that and seeing that sort of played out again and again and again. So there was the personal urge, something I talk about in my practice a lot. And it's the sort of basis of my practice is about compulsion. That the things I work on or with are things that haunt me and stay with me. And the key thing that stayed with me sort of throughout my looking through the collection at the Wellcome collection was Adamson's drawings for a what's referred to in the catalogue as a patient, but it's someone who was compelled to live at Nevern. Right now, I'm just going to read the catalogue entry for that, just because it's a useful context. And that is some of you saw some cyanotype prints of these drawings that Adamson did. The catalogue reads, 24 slides of pornographic drawings Adamson made at the request of one of his patients. According to John Timlin, who is Adamson's life partner, the patient was a composer and refused to draw or paint. He approached Adamson, asking him to draw the fantasies that were haunting him. These are homosexual and slightly BDSM, featuring a large pan-like creature being persecuted by smaller men. And so when I came across that in the catalogue, I was immediately like, wow, I have to look at this. And all of the stuff in the archive at Wellcome collection were also like, oh, I've been wanting to see this for so long. And so there became sort of a little crowd around my little desk in the materials room just to look at the slides. And they're tiny little glass slides, and working in analog photography, there's something that I've come across on that scale as well. And so alongside this exists a wide body of drawings from Adamson of people in the art studio, sketches and line drawings, much of the same style as these pornographic cartoons, which that work has been beautifully focused on by Beth. Beth's response to the Adamson collection, Beth Hopkins, who's in the chat, and there's a really beautiful work that really delves into that I really sort of lent on as a precursor for this research. And then for me, it was also thinking about the wider context and the structures in place there at Nevern, whilst engaging with Mary Bishop's work, poetically, who's sort of the interpretation of that has come up on screen now, which is also one of the easiest parts of the collection to connect with, I think, broadly for everyone, due to its extensive digitization on the Wellcome website. Lots of her paintings have been digitized, and they're really easy to access from the collection, so long as you just have a login. You don't even need to get a reader's pass to go into the rare materials room to see that stuff digitized. And the significance within this context that Mary was compelled to live at Nevern for over 3 decades, which is part of the context for why care in the community was brought in, and part of the historic context of our understanding of long-term hospitalization, long-term sort of locking people in these hospitals away from their communities, and that sort of feeds into that thinking and that exploration. And for me, part of the work in wanting to correspond, I wanted to correspond with Mary Bishop and with Edward Adamson, because much of the collection of the Adamson collection, the papers, are letters to Adamson, and there is sort of this one-sided correspondence that's been kept in his papers. And so it was wanting to emulate that part of the collection, and a lot of this work has been about sort of really sort of simulating my own collection. And that this work here is one of the cartoons that Adamson drew with me writing a letter to Mary about desire, asking where her desire was in that time that she was compelled to live at Nevern, and sort of ways of expressing that or connecting with people, and to undermine maybe these sort of social perceptions or the omissions and oppression of what I guess are base and almost universal human experiences of desire, desire for and sexuality. that are sort of so heavily policed and oppressed in a setting like Nevin, and still are today within psychiatric hospitals. It becomes pathologized, and within the archive or within medical records becomes pathologized or completely omitted. And I think within that context, there's also Adamson joined Nevin at a point when homosexuality or same-sex desire was so heavily policed that it was illegal. And to consider that the high potential that people compelled to live at Nevin, and even people that were engaging in the art studio, were people who were there just because they had same-sex desire, because they were unwed women, because they were more sexually active than was deemed healthy or acceptable at the time. That's a really important thing that that part of this work is about focusing on and revealing, and that's also much of what Rose Oran, a really incredible researcher into the Adamson collection, has been touching on, and I've learned so much from her. A huge part of this working has been about exploring the relations and hierarchies of the institution, be it Nevin, the Adamson collection, or the Wellcome collection, with the individual, Mary, Edward Adamson, this unnamed patient haunted by these fantasies, and me. And this body of work, as much of my work, is about twisting or stretching these things, these relations, the place between, and even to seek ways of inverting them. And part of the reason I was so drawn to the pornographic cartoons is that the request was made to Adamson, and that Adamson actually drew them, and that we still have them as a record, to think about the hierarchy of someone compelled to live at Nevin, and Adamson as a member of staff, and that Adamson as a gay man, and that is me calling him a gay man. I don't know what linguistic signifiers he would have identified with, but he was in a same-sex relationship with John Timlin, and that he drew these things, and to think that maybe there was pleasure or desire there in the drawing of these cartoons for Adamson to sort of throw in some fabulation with the archive, that some imagining and some questioning to destabilize what are often simplified aspects. I've got loads more writing about all the other questions, but I think for now it's probably better to talk about the work. So that work you just saw with the text was directly thinking about the historical context that on much of the wards at Nevin at the time. This is something I learned from David O'Flynn's lecture with Rose Oran. People had their teeth pulled, which was quite common at the time, for not just people that were compelled to live in these places, but sort of socially, to have your teeth pulled and to get false teeth was sort of seen as a bit more of a gift. And so this idea that on the wards they had communal teeth, so they had people didn't necessarily have their own false teeth, so people would use the communal teeth at meal times. And before the research had started, I'd been thinking about teeth and mouths a lot, and I'd written, where are your teeth? Where does your tongue go when it's not here? And so then in thinking about this correspondence with Mary, I was thinking that was a really sort of pertinent, sort of poetic question. And on that slip of paper, I activated that work by biting into it slightly. And then a lot of my other work has mainly been about seeing the strength in the visuals and the voice of this work, and kind of finding it really difficult to put myself between it, to really sort of feel like I needed to make something completely new. And so a lot of it is about layering these things together. I work a lot with collage, and so printing the pornographic drawings as cyanotypes is also playing with scale. Painting my version of this Mary Bishop painting of a person in red being with the head being bitten off, and overlaying that with some of Adamson's early notes, which are handwritten. And so I've worked with transcribing and collating these things together. and then the pornographic drawings, the paintings of those that I've done in green to play with the green screen, I've really blown them up to sort of almost, I think it's between A4 and A3 size on high quality paper, because I was also thinking about the materiality of the archive, and sifting through these things you really get a sense for the materiality, and a lot of the artworks are produced on really cheap materials, so a lot of it is on wallpaper lining paper, because it's about keeping things cost effective, and the art studio not necessarily being perceived as having value enough to invest that much money in the materials, and so I got this really beautiful cotton rag paper, and had a really enjoyable experience working with it, but also to think about that aspect, and a lot of this work for me is about being handled. It's about having images appear on both sides of the paper, so it has to be picked up and turned over, much like an archive. And I would love for this work to be gathered into into an archive, like an archival folder. And so it's not just about making work in response to, it's kind of thinking also that this work becomes its own archive of an archive, and sort of this constant layering. Yeah, I think I'm going to leave it there for now, because I know that sort of time-wise we're a bit pressed for time. I have lots more thoughts and lots more work to think about, but maybe we can touch on that a bit more in the discussion, or if there's anything that Dol, if you want to talk about anything now, or if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to have a chat now.
So first of all, thank you, and also thank you to those who stayed and engaged with what we feel is an important topic within mental health heritage, and that is identity, whatever that it means to you. We've got a couple of comments which I wondered if you might want to read in the break, Zach, and then when we have the discussion portion later, I think there's some really interesting things that have come up that we could circle back to. I am aware that you guys could all do like an entire seminar by yourselves, and maybe if we get funding, that's exactly what we'll do. But for now, we are running over time, and I'm also very conscious that anyone that did leave and maybe coming back, we obviously don't want to. We want to observe that clean space. So if it feels okay to everyone, I'm going to throw back to Charlotte, and maybe we'll have a shorter break and then come back with the lovely Andrea to do a creative activity if people wish to engage. There'll also be some conversation, and then we will have our wider discussion, which is a chance for us all to kind of have a reflection on not only today but the last 2 years. Charlotte, what do you think?
Yeah, thank you so much to everyone who shared already. It's really fascinating to hear all of your work. I was going to suggest that we have a short comfort break now to kind of reflect on the presentations and add any extra comments or feedback into the chat section, and then we can rejoin with the creative activity following the break. So maybe if we aim to join back around 2:45, 3, and then we can follow on with the creative activity then.
Yeah, I think that sounds good. So stay in the session, turn your camera off if you want some privacy, grab a drink, get a stretch, grab art supplies if that's what you want to do, and then we will check back in for a much needed creative section and more discussion. But again, please do look after yourselves and know that we are here if you need to check in with us. So, but for now, see everybody at 2:45. So welcome back from what I hope was a refreshing break. We'll just give everybody a chance to come back in and settle, and then we will introduce our next artist in the creative activity. And as you may have seen on the screen, there is a QR code and our email details and links in the chat. So I'm going to hand over to Andrea who is our wonderful Outside In ambassador artist who will be leading the creative activity. Andrea, would you like to give a visual description of yourself? You don't have to. And also, do you want to explain, or would you like me to read out what's on the slide?
I don't know which slide you're referring to.
Okay, so there's the slide that has what the activity is and a bit about you.
I've got it. Yes, fantastic. Sorry, wrong screen. I'll give a visual description of myself to start off with. Good to practice. I'm a 61-year-old intersectional she/they of Jewish descent. So I have grey hair, which is swept back in a bun. I wear glasses. And today I've got a colourful hand-knitted jumper on. So if I start the activity, and I'm going to switch away from this main screen so that I have a gallery view of everybody. For the last year, I've been doing a deep dive into a technique of embroidery called white work. And part of this came out of my response to the war in Palestine, with white being the color of surrender. I just kind of felt I can't live business as usual, and I somehow needed to reflect my sorrow, my grief in my practice. But also, I cannot stop myself from making. That's kind of a prerequisite for living. So I discovered in white work, I discovered this technique called shadow work and shadow applique. And shadow applique is when you take two sheer pieces of fabric and you use a very specific stitch to create a pattern in the fabric. It was essentially used on thin cotton handkerchiefs for ladies in the 19th century when this technique was re-established and became very popular in the drawing rooms of the middle classes in England. But with the shadow applique, I realized you can also trap objects in between the two layers. And from that, I've kind of developed a process that I use myself to help myself through difficulties, through often feeling triggered by situations, trying to look for something I wouldn't call positive, but a glimmer, something that kind of shines and makes me feel more gives me courage to kind of keep going, because tomorrow I'll wake up and I may feel very differently to how I feel right now. So today I've picked up an item from one of the many drawers in the cabinets of front room, which is also my studio, that I thought that has kind of historical significance to me, and that I thought I would encase as a means of protecting it, of giving it significance, and also ultimately one day I would like to create a wall of objects that I have enshrouded in different fabrics, as my personal archive. I'm very aware this is an archive project, and thank you. It was really fascinating listening to you all. And I'm also fascinated with the idea of archives and also our personal archives as artists. So this is my way of in a way befuddling and confusing, because these are objects that will be hidden or not completely conspicuous. But in another sense, it creates a whole area where you could actually write about the objects that you are encasing in fabric, and it becomes a whole thing in itself. Anyway, today I've chosen this beautiful, it's an earring from a Zulu watchman in South Africa in the 80s, where I grew up. The Zulu men had long pierced ears that they stretched over these. It's made of hardboard on the back, and then they've used bits of I can't think of the plastic, what's perspex that they found lying around to create these incredible designs. And I've had these for years. I have these drawers full of objects like this. And today I felt like working with some felt. And so I've got two pieces of felt. And I'm just going to start off by maybe stitching these two pieces of felt together and enclosing the object inside, so it will be tucked inside, and in that way, in my drawer, when I look at this little envelope of fabric, I know exactly what's inside there, and it just gives it a sense of worthiness in my eyes. I've spent time with it, and so in this way, I'm reconnecting with my past. I'm reconnecting with ancestors, and paying homage and giving some honor to these men who lived such difficult lives. So, Jo, should we have the second slide so that we can just go through? Does everybody want to start? Have you got objects? Is everybody participating?
I was just going to say, so if anybody wants to, if they've got bits that they have to hand, you can absolutely make a start and work alongside as Andrea works, and I'm actually going to be making as well, and we will have a little bit of quiet time to create, and I'll let you know when that is, but at the moment we're still kind of having a bit of a chat and listening to Andrea's practice, which is so interesting, and I think a beautiful summation of the 3 different approaches from the artists today. But yes, please don't wait, grab your supplies and take this time for creativity and expression, and you have permission to take some time for you, and you have permission to play. So Andrew, did you want to talk about the piece that's so we're looking at the 2 squares of fabric,
yes,
with the bonfire against racism badge on top? That's what we've got on our screen currently.
So this goes back in my life to 2017, when I started to make not art, but household decorative objects. I was a mother, single mother, with mental health issues, physical issues, started to get ill. I didn't know what to do with myself. And so I started to sell some of this shweshwe fabric. It's traditional Swazi fabric from South Africa, brought by the British, the whole process of acid dye and how they make these intricate geometric designs. But it's very much used by African women today, and usually for dresses that are that wedding dresses. The young women use it a lot for wedding dresses. It's very fashionable now. And I lived in Lewis in East Sussex, and in 2017, my son was punched in the face for not being white, and this resulted in an organization being set up, and we called ourselves Bonfire Against Racism. It was 3 women who wanted to deal with the idea of blacking up for Bonfire, which is a very big event every November in Lewis. And so we made badges that we handed out, because badges every year, each Bonfire Society will print and distribute a new badge. And so we made the Bonfire Against Racism badges, and I found them the other day, and I just wanted to wrap one up. So Jo, if you show the next succession of images, you can kind of get a sense of what happens. So I started off with a simple running stitch, just, putting a knot in the end of my thread, and starting to sew an envelope that I could wrap, that I could slide the badge into. I'm ready for the next one. And then just decorating as best as you know. There's no right or wrong about all of this. It doesn't have to be a square shape. It can be any shape, the enclosure you create. And so I did what they call a double back stitch, because I filled in the gaps between the running stitch in green. And then I used a metallic thread, and I did something called a chain stitch running around it, just to give another bit of decorative edging to the piece. And let's see the next one. Okay, I guess that's the last piece. That's where it ended up, with the badge fully enclosed and no longer visible.
Yeah. So if we could go back to the introduction slide, just so that we've got the reminder for people to stay safe, and what the activity is, and we'll leave that up. So if anyone has any questions about the activity, if you pop them in chat and I can read them out, and then Andrea can respond and we can chat about them. We do have some nice time carved out to sit, reflect and make. And as you might have gathered, one of the key pieces of, I guess, findings is that we want to, from the research group, embed creative expression as a way to process and move through the difficult, to have the conversation and not shy away from it. But that has to be done safely and in a way that feels right to you at that time. And as Andrea very eloquently said, they may feel differently tomorrow. You might feel differently in an hour. And having an object that you want to remember, and that doesn't necessarily mean, it doesn't have any emotion attached to it, but you want to remember it. It has importance regardless of what you attribute to it. This is a way of embracing, enshrining, encasing. It could be small enough for you to carry around. It could be placed somewhere that you know where it is, that if you're having a difficult time, you can engage with. Or if you're having a great time and you just feel like you want to remind yourself or ground yourself, that can also be, it can be whatever you need it to be at that time. And you don't have to use fabric. You can use thin paper or acetate. I've actually got, not sure if it will show up because it's so sheer, but I've got a very sheer, almost cling film like, and I'm going to wrap mine in this and then use elastic bands and sticky tape. So I'm literally using what I have to hand. So we encourage everyone to do the same. We've got, so personal archive sounds like a beautiful idea, which I agree with. And so for a second, I wondered if it would be a nice idea for us to have a bit of quiet space for us to create. And again, you can turn camera off if you wish. And then any thoughts that come up, then please pop them in the chat. And then I might annoy everyone and come back in and ask Andrea some more questions about their amazing work. So we're at just on 3 o'clock now. So I'm going to suggest we have 5 minutes of quote unquote clean space for reflection, creativity, and pausing. Okay, I'm just going to gently bring us back into the discussion space. If you want to, you can keep working for the rest of the session. We'd love you to and encourage you to. If anyone has stuff that they are working on right now and they want to hold it up to the camera and we can have a bit of a collective share, you don't have to talk about it. It just, I think it might be kind of nice. And then I'm going to read some of the comments. So I'm just going to hold up. In fact, I'm just going to unblur my screen so it might be easier for you to actually see. There we go. So there we go. That's what I've been working on. Fabulous. Wow, you've worked so quickly, Andrea. That's amazing.
It every day. So, but honestly, for me, it's a doodling process. It's a way of emptying, and it's not outcome oriented. It's just something to do and to feel like you've done something without kind of being important artwork, you know. So it's, anyway,
yeah,
thank you.
Love that kind of tactile doodling.
Yeah.
Feels like a really
Yeah.
good way. And so I've literally just done things that have come to hand, and I'm not going to explain why, but again, as a visual description, mine is a cream envelope that has been kind of squished and folded as if it's been about to be thrown away, and a pair of scissors, a very small pair of embroidery scissors, is caught kind of in it as if it's mid cutting it up, and then it's surrounded in this. It's actually dissolvable fabric, which I've had on the side for another project, and it's been sat there for about 6 weeks and I still haven't gotten around to it, so I've used it here in a completely different way. And then some really kind of leery coloured elastic bands, which feels quite apt for the lots of different layers that is me. So you can use anything quite instinctively, and that is the power of, well, yeah, creativity in all its forms. So okay, so we have some lovely comments which I'm going to read out now, and then if anybody did want to ask Andrea or have a conversation, because our next section we will be having an open discussion, and I think it might be quite nice to organically move into that now. Andrea, if that feels safe and okay.
Yes.
Awesome. So I've got some people are talking about the objects are visible, what fabric is used, so that's one of the questions we've got.
An organdie, it's Organdie, or organza, or a chiffon, are sheer fabrics that were used. You can also get, they call it a cotton batiste, BATISTE, which is a very sheer cotton that they made handkerchiefs with in the 1900s. So that's what traditionally one uses for shadow work or shadow applique in white work embroidery. So yes, but break the
we've had that somebody is organising whilst listening, which for them is relaxing and in their own way creative completely.
Yes.
I love that people are kind of doing their own wellness activities. This is exactly what we were hoping for in this session. And so I can see that Zach has their hand up and they've asked, so I'm going to let them kind of articulate what they've put in the chat rather than me continuing to take up bandwidth. So Zach.
Hiya. Yeah, I put in the chat like a link, having sort of discovered about Beth Hopkins' practice last year, and seeing the binding with the fabric and thread. I feel like there's a real harmonizing there, and sort of I'd be interested to hear from, I guess, from both of you about like the similarities and differences of that, and if you have spoken about that before, and then also just as a sort of secondary thing, we've Dee spoke about the Bethlehem collection, and I did some engagement work last year, which is how I met Beth, through the Change Minds program they were running in the archive, and to think about textiles in this historic setting also very closely links to very difficult subjects of restraint. Yes. And straight jackets and strong dresses, and to think about the sort of the visual significance of that. It feels like this kind of, I was thinking of a garment made of these patches of items stitched together. I feel like, yeah, my brain's sort of fizzing, but I really, really love this. Thank you.
Great. Beth, you have introduced your work, because it's very, I have seen it. You had an exhibition maybe 2 years ago, was it?
Yeah, so I've been using binding in my practice sort of for a while. I initially started because I do a lot at Bethlehem. The first time I used it, I went, so there's a tip at the hospital, and occasionally, if you're lucky, they'll let you in and let you get objects. And they had this big pile of light bulbs from the wards that have been taken down, sort of the ones that are sort of interesting shape. So I was really thinking about what they'd witnessed on the wards and sort of wanting to honour that in a similar way, and protect them and that kind of thing. So that's where the binding came from for me.
Yes.
Yeah, and then I've used it on other objects with different meanings. But as Zach mentioned, it's kind of this tension between protecting and binding, but also restriction and restraint, things like chemical restraint, physical restraint. So yeah, that kind
And
of
it's also sitting with hard subjects and not running away from them, because you're actively engaged with them, so they don't become. I found my thoughts can get overwhelming, and if I've got my hands, and even if it's plasticine, and I guess it is a form of what do the neuro diversity, what stimming, it's
yeah.
And things, yes.
So I find that and sewing is a very repetitive and intensive process where I am with my thoughts all day. So I really loved coming across the shadow work, because especially in the translucent, the visible fabric, because I have drawers full of things. I love assemblage. As I would like to be a sculptor. I'm putting it out. Be my thing, you know, bringing everything is just, the world is just a great big sculpture, but it's kind of yeah, I think it's sitting with difficult things and giving them some form of relevance. I think also, as I'm a non-galleried artist, as I guess most of us are, and so you don't have anyone who's going to be there making a report of your work, and this has made with these materials and it's this size, and you know, and the year it was made. So in a sense we have to do it for ourselves, and so I sit and I look at my front room is my studio, and every drawer I have, I've only been an artist for maybe 4 or 5 years now, or been brave enough to call myself one for the last 4 or 5 years. But I've collected stuff over the years that I haven't been able to throw away, and that has significance to me, and that I want to use somewhere, and I share it in other ways. And so yeah, I think it's this archive. This is the start, I can feel, of my archiving process, this feeling of wrapping and enclosing and then writing a report about it. But definitely, Zach, I was thinking also in terms of the Korean do a technique of pujagi, where they take translucent, they make more window fabrics, and it's 2 pieces of fabric that are seamed together using almost like a French seam that women can do by hand. But there's a translucence, because the fabric allows the light in, but gives you privacy. And so that whole thing is also like extremely relevant. So I thought, like, the images in the first, or the objects in the first image are very particular to me. I mean, the Star of David with the red triangle over the yellow one was what Hitler would have one of the things he would have defined, ways he would have defined me, which is an asocial. The red were for apolitical, asocial creatures, and so, but where do I go with that? And at least now it's wrapped in a piece of fabric, and it has some form of being exhibited, other than lying in the bottom of a drawer somewhere where it's meaningless to anybody who comes across it. They might pick it up, look at it, put it down and move on. But this wrapping and then combining the wrapping, it somehow brings, and as Beth used with the light bulbs, it suddenly it gives significance to the time spent with these objects and the lives spent in it. It's a witness. It's a form of witnessing as well, I suppose.
Yeah, like transforming a relationship that you have as the person working with this object and this material, but then also doing this kind of double bind, to use a psychological term, of like transforming, of like hiding and revealing at the same time to a viewer. It's really a really beautiful nuanced practice.
You speak so beautifully, Zach. We're going to need you to write all this down for us.
Well, the thing about these settings is that you have a conversation about these things, and that's where often when the words come. So I think maybe having if you ever want to write your thoughts or figure out your thoughts on this stuff, rather than sitting and trying to write it yourself, I find just conversing and then having a transcript is often the way to get the best.
It's clever. Yeah. No, it's great. Thank you.
On that wonderful note and slight segue, obviously we invite everyone to continue making as we move into the final part of the session. I'm just also wanting to be aware and thankful for people's time, including artists, because they are sharing of themselves, and including Beth, who, for those of you who don't know, Beth Hopkins is with us in their outside in role. So thank you for sharing in your artist role, and I hope that felt safe and okay and not quite not too spotlighty, but again, we want to make sure that we honor and respect everybody and where they are right now. Charlotte, are we going to continue recording the discussion, or are we at a point where we might want to kind of be a little less formal?
Yeah, we can sort of end the recording there and just have a bit of a safe space towards the end for the last 10 minutes if anybody wanted to share anything more personal. That's absolutely fine.